My name is Kent. I am one of the pastors here and delighted to have you here with us today. We are in kind of a weird space in the church, and that is this space between Christmas and New Year. And we live in a world whose Christmas season starts, at Halloween, and then after Christmas Day, it's done. And we have different seasons in the church. So we were in the season of Advent, which is the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. And then Christmas Eve is really the first hint of Christmas. And then in the church, we're supposed to do 12 days of Christmas. But everybody else is done with it. So I don't know if you're the kind of person who's already had like too much Christmas and you're ready to be done, but you're going to get one more day of Christmas today. I did have a question related to that, and it was the question, was there a Christmas song that you heard this season that was too much, like you heard it too much and you're not a fan? And I guess I want you to actually turn to your neighbors and tell them yes or no, you had too much of a particular song, and what was the song if you had one. Go ahead and just chat about that for just a minute. A Christmas song that you had too much of. Okay. It seemed like every time I turned the car on, the radio station I had was doing that Chipmunk song, which I'm not a huge fan of anyway, but there you have it. Okay, was there any other part of Christmas that was too much for you? Like you just go, oh, I've had enough, it's too much. And I had someone confess on the way in that they were with a family member who talked too much, and they had too much family talk. Anything else from Christmas and you go, you just had enough of it? Yeah? Family? Santa Claus? Too much cookie, yeah, too much junk food, too much. The basic mood in the first service today was like exhaustion. So I think they must have had too much partying or too much family or too much something. You seem more lively, so good job with that. We're going to do the standard Sunday after Christmas sermon, which, if you pay attention to that kind of thing, is about the Magi, the wise men who come to visit Jesus, because they are visitors who come. Our nativity scenes are incorrect if we put the Magi at the stable, because they didn't get there in time for that. They came much later. And our tradition is to think about them then after the normal Christmas stuff. And to do that, we're going to switch from Luke to Matthew and look at another unexpected encounter with these guys and what it meant. And so the story's in Matthew 2. If you want to follow along in your Bible or on your phone, Matthew 2, we're going to look at a whole bunch of verses in a moment, but I'm going to start with just one verse. Matthew 2, verse 3. And this is what it says. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So we've been talking about unexpected encounters, and today's unexpected encounter comes with a word that you maybe weren't expecting, and that word is tyrant. Tyranny is cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, unreasonable use of power. And if you think of tyrants and their tyrannical behavior, it usually is cruel and also oppressive and very arbitrary and unreasonable in its lengths. And we're going to look at a character today and encounter him. And there's other words we could use for this guy. We could call him a despot. We could say he's unjust, harsh, repressive. We could just call him a bully, because he's all these things. But the man that we meet in Matthew 2 is infamous because he was cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, and unreasonable. He used power. He was a bad king. And the name of this king is Herod, King Herod. And you met him in Matthew 2, verse 3, and you see him in a state of kind of being disturbed. So what I want to do for the next few moments is I want to spend some time looking at this king and trying to imagine what kind of king he was. I thought it would help you if you had a picture of him. So I have a picture of King Herod that we want to show you. And here's the picture of King Herod. Okay? This picture could be used of any tyrant or any bully, but basically it fits him perfectly, as do the words cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, and unreasonable use of power. This all fits King Herod perfectly. Now, I landed on the word tyranny for a very specific reason, and it's because I came across a blog a couple weeks ago, and the blog was entitled "The Tyranny of the Toys." And this blog was written as a gift purchasing guide for parents, and it was designed to help them understand how to get what's the right thing for them to purchase for their kids. And the image that he created in this blog was that the toys that we have are like tyrants. They become oppressive. So we replace a picture of this hand with like a Lego set or a Barbie doll or maybe a stuffed unicorn, and imagine it beating down on a little person. This is what the guy was describing. And what he said was, he called them an unintentional plastic graveyard of toys becomes cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, and unreasonable in its power over us. Power over the parents to have to get these things, and power over the kids when they get all of this stuff and don't know what to do with it. And basically, his lament is that kids have so much, especially so many toys, that they get overwhelmed so that they can't play with any of them. They don't enjoy any of them, and so that toy becomes tyrannical. I got a picture of my grandson Micah on Christmas morning of him with a pile of paper and toys all around him. And tyranny of the toys was, and he was playing with one little toy, which was like some magnetic blocks. And then Shayna, I talked to her later, and she said, he played with that one toy all day long. All this other stuff is at his disposal, but it's too much. It's tyrannical. Some of you remember a famous scene like this in the movie A Christmas Story. Remember Ralphie, after he gets all this stuff, and there he is hugging his, a Zeppelin, and he can't take it. This is the tyranny of the toys. It's too much. Surround kids with all this stuff, and then it becomes cruel almost, oppressive, arbitrary certainly, and unreasonable. Now there's another tyranny at work here, and that's called the tyranny of choice. And this tyranny is a tyranny that comes because we have more options now than we've ever had before. At any time in history, we have more options for more things. And we are tempted to think that more options is always a good thing. And it's good to a degree, but too many options becomes bad. If we have too many options, then we can't decide at all. We become paralyzed by all these options. This is called the tyranny of choice. So just think about all the options you have when you go to the grocery store. How many kinds of breakfast cereal do we really need? Have you ever paid attention the last time? I mean, it's a whole entire aisle and all these options. Really? Does that look unreasonable when you see all those choices? How many kinds of toothpaste or diapers or kinds of mustard? Does anyone here who wasn't in the first service know how many kinds of mustard there are in the world? How many different kinds of mustard can you purchase? 6,000. This is according to the National Museum of Mustard, which Mary and I have visited, and it's quite fascinating, but who needs that many choices, right? Okay, did anybody watch the Pop-Tart Bowl yesterday? Anybody? Okay. Among many other questions that were raised for me while I was watching it was, how many flavors of Pop-Tarts are there actually? Does anybody know how many flavors of Pop-Tarts there are? Did you notice that the announcers kept marketing Pop-Tarts? They're talking about the sampling of Pop-Tarts and what they were eating. How many kinds of Pop-Tarts are there? 25 different flavors of Pop-Tarts. Who needs one Pop-Tart for one thing, but 25 different flavors? It's too much. This is the tyranny of choice. I have learned that whenever I go to Fairway with a shopping list from Mary, before I enter the store, before I leave the house actually, I have to go item by item through the shopping list to get clarity. Now, what exactly is this item on the list? Because there's been too many times when I end up at the grocery store, standing in an aisle, looking at a wall of options, and I'm paralyzed because I have no idea which one is the correct option for me to purchase for this list. Anybody else ever been there? Tyranny of choices. Okay, the tyranny of the toys and the tyranny of choices got me to tyranny that comes from too much. And as I was reading through Matthew 2, the thing I decided was there's too much king in this passage. too much king. And what I want to do for the next few moments is I want to look at what is the consequence of having too much king. Okay, so the first consequence is this. Too much king brings worry. Too much king brings worry. Here's the source of this idea, Matthew 2, verses 1 to 3. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. The king is worried. And when the king worries, everybody worries, especially if the king is a tyrant. Now, King Herod held quite a bit of power in his position as king of the Jews. He was a Roman-appointed king of Judea, and that included Jerusalem. And he had enough power that if he was worried, then everybody was worried, because he was known for using his power badly. Now, he had done some good things. He had total authority in this area, and that allowed him to do whatever he wanted. And so one of the things that he did with his power was he was known as a king who did lots of building. So he built like a new port in Caesarea, which was good for the economy, and he built aqueducts, which was good to get water to people. He built himself a couple of palaces, which was good for him. He built the temple. He actually finished the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and that was good for him, especially because his wife had nagged him to do this. This is the gossip about King Herod. His wife, who was a Jew, wanted the temple rebuilt, so because she nagged him enough, he built it. But that was good for the people of his role. He controlled the regional government, he controlled some of the military in the region, and he controlled the purse strings. So King Herod had quite a bit of power, even though the Romans looked at him as like a puppet king. He had enough power that if he was going to lose his power, he would have worried a lot. And now he hears a rumor that there's another king who's been born, and that's bad. Because, as you all know, usually there's only one king at a time. So, King Herod, who has a well-deserved reputation for cruelty and just enough power to exercise this cruelty, is worried. And because he's worried, everybody's worried. Because he's a tyrant who has often done cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, unreasonable things with his power. So he's worried, and if he's worried, everyone's worried. Just to remind you again of the picture of King Herod. Because if he's going to do something about this, someone's going to get in trouble. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. I imagine that the good people under King Herod's rule, who were Jews, actually prayed a particular prayer, which we find in Psalm 119, verse 134. This is the prayer they prayed: "Deliver me from the tyranny of man." That was probably a common prayer throughout King Herod's reign, but when they heard that he was disturbed, they began to pray in earnest: "God, deliver us from the tyranny of man." Too much king brings worry. And when a king is worried, that brings trouble. So too much king also brings trouble. Trouble is inevitable when a king who's a tyrant is worried. Here's the trouble described, back to Matthew 2. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the king was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too can go and worship him." Did King Herod have any intentions of worshiping this other child? No, he does not, because he's a tyrant. And he's worried, and so he starts stirring up trouble. Just a little side note, I'm not sure what to do with, but to get the information about the king and where he was going to be born, King Herod had to consult the scribes and the teachers of the law. So he had to go to the Jewish leaders in the temple, and he had to ask them to go back through the prophecies and discover who is this king and where is he going to be born. And they were complicit in this ruse, which got me wondering, why would they do that? And I don't know the whole answer, but I'm thinking it has something to do with another kind of trouble that's going to come for the king later, for King Jesus later. Anyway, the threat of a rival king leads to the ruse where Herod sends him off and says, hey, come back and tell me so that I can go worship this guy too. And he puts into place a plan. Matthew 2, verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Jerusalem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. This is the kind of thing a tyrant does. He makes trouble for everybody. And this trouble here is a great grief, great ruthless, heartbreaking. It's actually such a famous incident that it's got a name, and it's known throughout history as the Massacre of the Innocents, because he did this ruthless, arbitrary, senseless thing to these children. It's actually still commemorated today, the Massacre of the Innocents. Does anybody know what day we commemorate and we honor the Massacre of the Innocents? December 28th. So yesterday was the day for honoring the innocents who were massacred. Herod did this because a tyrant will do anything to protect his power, to keep it in his grasp, including murdering little boys. It's so cruel, so unreasonable. And I have a picture, again, of what this looks like, just to remind you. This is what it looks like to be that kind of tyrant. Too much king leads to trouble. And this has actually always been the case. When tyrants come into power, they want to hold on to their power. They want to press down anybody they can to keep their power. Ruthless kings and dictators who use cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, unreasonable power to control others and to preserve their power. And maybe you, if you're a history buff, know some of these names: Genghis Khan, Caligula, Mao Zedong, Vlad the Impaler, Ivan the Terrible, King Leopold of Britain, of Belgium, Stalin, Hitler, Idi Amin, Saddam Hussein. History is filled with these guys who they've used cruel, oppressive, unreasonable, arbitrary power to control others and to keep their power. And it seems like kings and dictators and despots, they're all like that. They can't have power and use it well. There is a saying, that says power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it seems like history has borne this out. But it got me wondering, what would it look like if there was a king who had absolute power and they were not a tyrant? You wonder what that could look like? What if too much king brought something different, something completely unexpected? So there's a lot going on here in Matthew 2, and something else that's going on very different is what's going on with this baby king, King Jesus. Let's read about it. Matthew 2, verse 9. After the Magi had heard the king, that's King Herod, they went on their own way, and then the star they had seen reappeared ahead of them, until it stopped over the place where the king was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed, and on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for this child to kill him." So he got up and took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where they stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Herod the Great had tried everything within his power to undo God's plan, to try to undermine the prophecies that God had made. He had done everything he could try to do to control all the players in the story with cruel, oppressive, arbitrary, unreasonable use of power to squash down this future king, this rival king. But instead, God used King Herod to fulfill prophecies about this child king and prepare the way for this king to rule and reign forever. This story is an amazing story. We see that there's no stopping God's power, that Herod certainly did not have enough power to stop God's plan, that there was no stopping the arrival of the newborn king, there was no stopping God's plan to protect the child king, there was no way to get to the child king. It was inevitable that the King of Kings was going to survive and become king someday. There's no doubt about that. And that the kingdom that he was going to establish is going to be so contrasting to the kingdom that Herod had set up that it becomes mind-blowing. King Herod was just this king worrying about how he consolidate his power. This baby king surrendered absolute power in heaven to come down to be born as a baby, and then there was no stopping him once he came here. All this raises lots of questions for me. One of the questions is this: what if a king came with absolute power and could not be corrupted by that power? What if a king came who was not a tyrant king, but instead loved his people with unconditional love? This led to a whole bunch of other questions like this. Would you say that it is possible to have too much justice, too much healing, too much joy, too much peace? Would you say that it is possible to have too much love? Oh, that's enough love. Stop loving. Is it possible? Is it possible to have too much forgiveness? This is what King Jesus brings to us. Unexpected for me all the way. I can hardly even imagine this. I tried to imagine a picture of what this kind of king would look like. And the closest thing I could come to is a famous picture that somebody painted on the ceiling. Does anybody recognize the picture we have here? You recognize where this comes from? Okay, this is from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo. It's not the whole picture is brilliant and amazing, but I wanted to just focus on the hands, because I was thinking of a tyrant king smacking down his people. And I was trying to imagine, well, what would the hands of a non-tyrant king look like? And I just think this is a brilliant depiction of that. If you are familiar with the picture, you know that the hand on the left side is the hand of the man, of human. And the pose of this man in this picture is stunning to me. The man is reclined, and he's kind of got his hand hanging out there like this. And it looks like he doesn't give a rip about it. It looks like he could care less, just kind of laying back. The hand on the right is the hand of God. And if you look at the whole picture, you'll see that the hand of God is stretched out, and God is making like every effort to stretch his hand out as far as he can to close the gap between God and people. That's how God is. This king is not a king who came to smack us down, but he's a king who came to say, I'm going to do everything I can to close the gap between me and you. Too much king, unexpected. So as I was pondering this, these things always raise way more questions than I answer. But one of the questions that got raised for me at this point then was like, well, we've been celebrating the arrival of this king. I mean, Advent's all waiting for him to come. On Christmas Eve, yay, we're celebrating, he's here. This morning we're celebrating the king has come. The newborn king has arrived. And I see that, but you know what? Has anything changed in the world? Because I find myself looking out the window and thinking, you know what? It doesn't seem like so much has changed. It looks like brutality and tyranny are still in charge, right? Violence and oppression, these things still happened. I mean, the massacre of the innocents happened, and all the tyrants who've come since them, including today. So I notice that there's violence and injustice and ruthless brutality. These things still happen. So hunger still happens, war still happens, cancer still happens, sickness still happens, violence, hatred, abuse, injustice, gossip, sickness. I mean, is tyranny still in charge? Now, Matthew's story about the unexpected king helps me a lot in this because he reminds me of a couple things. First, he reminds me that this baby king is not a tyrant. He's unlike any other king. He's not a conquering hero. He's not coming like that. But Matthew goes to great lengths throughout his gospel to paint a picture of King Jesus as a servant king, that he came to serve his people, to reach out to them, to close the gap, not to oppress them. Do you think it's possible for us to have too much servanthood? It would certainly be unexpected if the servanthood came from a king. I found a verse in Isaiah 54 that describes what comes because of this unexpected king. See if this doesn't sound like good news. Isaiah 54:14. In righteousness you will be established. Tyranny will be far from you. You will have nothing to fear. Terror will be far removed. It'll come near to you. This king who came to serve us, to live a perfect life and go to the cross and die for us, to be raised again from the dead, to ascend back to heaven, says, with me, no tyranny, no terror, no fear. Unexpected. A couple next steps to think about. One would be this. I read a passage like this and it makes me think it's a warning to watch out for tyrant kings, to watch out for people who have used power and done it cruelly and arbitrarily and unreasonably to accomplish their purposes or to control people, to watch out for tyrants. Sometimes we're attracted to tyrant kings, people of power, because we think, well, they can get things done. They got the power to make things happen. They can fix the situation for us. And we're attracted to them. I would say, watch out for tyrant kings and be careful because that power that they're using now for your benefit could also become your downfall. And there's actually another name for this if we put too much confidence in a tyrant king. It's called idolatry. And so pay attention to the people that maybe you know or follow, listen to that are like tyrant kings. Watch out. Second thing would be, another next step would be to welcome this newborn king and to welcome him as a king. That we recognize that kings reign and rule, kings have authority. So maybe a good next step would be to say, hey, King Jesus, you have authority over me. You can reign and rule in my life. God, I'm willing to submit to you. And maybe you want to explore a little bit more about what that means for Jesus to rule in your life. That'd be a really great next step. And then a third potential next step would be to say, hey, what if you could learn everything you could about this baby king? And to do that, there's a very practical suggestion, and that is do the Bible recap. And as you're doing it, pay attention to how much king stuff is in there. It's all over the place. And there's all kinds of tyrant kings, and then there's one king who's different than all the others. So as you're reading through the Bible recap, maybe just pay attention to King Jesus and all the stuff that leads up to predicting his coming, and then all the stuff that comes after he comes. That'd be really a great next step for some of us to take. Okay, so I don't know if you've had too much Christmas, too much king talk now maybe, but too much Christmas music. I was very disappointed on the day after Christmas when I turned on my all Christmas all the time music station, and they were not playing Christmas music anymore. I wasn't ready for it to be done, so I've still been listening to some. I did come across a song this year, just a couple weeks ago actually, one I'd never heard before, and it helped me recognize this King Jesus. And I thought it might help you too, so I'd like to end our whole series by playing another Christmas song for you. And the song is called Manger Throne. And while you're listening to this song, just think about this question. Can you have too much Jesus?